Welcome to Innovator Café, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. Through each episode, Dave and his guests provide resources and assurances to build a company growth roadmap. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of Innovator Café, Dave Stevens.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Innovator Café. Today we have a very special guest, Bruce Friedman. Bruce, very difficult to talk about your background, it's so extensive, but I'm just going to say that you're a branding expert and a product branding expert. Welcome to the show. We'd love to hear more about you. Tell me about yourself and your background.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. So branding is certainly something that I've focused on for a long time. A little bit about my background is grew up in Southern California, went to USC, and found myself. I'm too old to give you my whole background, but I'll skip through to some of the highlights. So in the 1990s, I was a co-founder of a company called Part Minor. Part Minor was a technology company that we based in New York. We started with 6 people in the mid 90s, and we exited that company in the late 90s, early 2000s, with about 600 people in 28 offices around the world, and really built a e-commerce platform for trading electronic components. And we exited that business before the market crashed in 2001, fortunately. And we had a lot of success there. So that was really my first foray into successful business. From there, in the early 2000s, we moved back home to Malibu, California, and I took a couple of years off, which is a dangerous thing when you've got dry powder and a couple of years off as an entrepreneur. Something dangerous is going to happen, right? So a friend of mine came along and asked me if I was interested in the consumer branding space, consumer brands. And I didn't know a lot about it, but I knew I wanted to do zero with technology at the time. And so I said yes. And from 2003 through 2019, I built and ran a company that acquired heritage or orphan consumer product brands, as well as licenses, primarily in the health and beauty space. And the company grew significantly, and we acquired more and more assets, and actually our own manufacturing facility, which was sold in 2019.
Hold on a second. How do you acquire brands?
So what we did was we looked for brands that were being discarded or set aside or no longer focused on by the large consumer product groups, CPG companies. And they had large portfolios of brands that they just don't focus on. Brands that are household names that are no longer, first, second, or even third in the marketplace, and kind of get cast aside. So we look to acquire brands that way. We also look for trademarks that have been expired and not renewed and given up. And I'll give you one example of a brand that we bought. We bought a couple brands. We bought a brand called Silkians. We bought a brand called Tame.
I remember those.
Yeah, these were really well-known hair care brands that were owned by Unilever and just cast aside. In fact, the trademarks expired. So we acquired the trademarks, and then we contacted the company to acquire the copyrights along with those trademarks so we can bring those products back to market. And in many cases, we pick up those copyrights for little money. And then we relaunch the brand, and we can connect those brands and trademarks to the actual history of the product. So we did a lot of that with the large portfolio of brands. And really focused our business in the value space and of retail, value segment and mass segment of retail, and built a large portfolio in that space. What we also did was we migrated a lot of our business into licensing, and we identified very well-known national brands that we would extend into relatable categories, certainly our health and beauty categories. And we had a big portfolio that included SpongeBob, Dora, the Disney princesses,
Hmm?
some corporate brands. All of those we licensed from the licensors, owners of the IP, into these new channels. And we became pretty well known in the licensing space. Since 2019, and selling off our manufacturing, we've really pivoted into being a straight licensing and branding company. And we have identified certain categories, for instance, the snack category, where we've licensed pretty deeply into snack with a couple of very significant brands. One is Hostess, and the other is Skippy, which is owned by Hormel. And we've licensed those into new categories in the snack food segment. Again, taking well-known, well-recognized brands and extending them into relatable categories.
Hmm?
And
Give
those,
us an example of how you did that.
sure.
What products did you end up with?
Yeah, so let's take Hostess, for instance. We have licensed Hostess into the popcorn category.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in licensing is brands that are well known, and some are lesser well known, decide that they want to license out certain brands. Generally, they hire a licensing agent, no different than a celebrity hires an agency.
Mm-hmm.
That agent represents that brand and then finds people to license into specific categories that have been identified by the brand owner. So, for instance, there's a very large licensing agency called Global Icons. Well known, they have a large portfolio of licenses that they represent. They represent Hostess. So we, over the years, have gotten to know, the more important, larger licensing agencies. We contacted our friends at Global Icons that represent Hostess, and we said to them, we want to license Hostess. And we made a proposal, which includes the category, the territory, the minimum guarantee, because you have to pay them a certain amount of money to guarantee them sales forecast, customers, the product, and you enter into an agreement with Hostess, for instance. That was our license for popcorn, and then we work in partnership with them to develop the product. We're responsible for all the costs of development. We develop it. We have to get the samples approved, the product approved. We have to get all of our artwork approved. Everything to do with the product that has their name on it has to be approved by the brand owner. And it takes time. It takes, sometimes upwards of a year to do all that work, because you've got to, satisfy them that the product is good. You have all the licenses required to manufacture the product, the distribution channels, depending on the license, that they approve, the artwork, the language, everything has to be done because you're representing their brand. So we went through that whole process, and we have, for instance, Hostess popcorn on the shelf today. And you can Google, Hostess popcorn, and you can see what it looks like. And looks just like the package of their snack cakes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of a kind of a case summary of how we went about specifically licensing Hostess. And the same process takes place with most of the brands that we license. It is really much easier to license a brand that is already receptive to being in the licensing business as opposed to brands that you contact directly who have no real licensing program. Those are much harder and more difficult. But my expertise has been in identifying brands for relatable categories and extend them into relatable categories where the consumer sees that brand and says, "Oh, that makes sense."
Sure.
And it makes sense that, and then buy that. It gives us instant brand recognition, awareness, and we've sometimes we're wrong, where we guess wrong, and it costs us a lot of money. But when we're right, we're right, and when we're right, it gives us the ability to compete with any of the large brands on the shelf.
So if you were going to launch a specially flavored bag of popcorn, right? If you wanted to launch your own brand with some kind of flavoring, how does that compare with slapping the Hormel or the Hostess label on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is what consumers recognize and feel safe purchasing, especially value consumers. So a value consumer goes into a store, let's say Dollar Tree or Dollar General, Family Dollar, and they have their hard-earned money with them, and they want to buy something for their family. They're going to buy something that is trusted, safe, recognizable, has brand equity, as opposed to using their money to pioneer and buy, Bruce's popcorn, for instance, which they've never heard of.
Sure.
As you move up in consumer demographics and move up in the kind of on the retail food chain to more expensive stores in retail and so forth, consumers have more disposable income and they're more willing to try new branded product. So it's actually easier to launch brands that don't have readily available trade equity in the higher demographic or retail segment, because those consumers have disposable income and they're willing to try a new brand. But in the value class of trade, where honestly most people shop across the country, it is much safer for them to buy brands that they've heard of and are a little more, especially our brands, because in many cases our core brands don't sell every day in those classes of trade. So for instance, we are launching Hostess, we've launched Hostess popcorn. Hostess is not a brand that will be selling in those markets every single day. So it's more of an aspirational product.
Got it. So what does the brand give you? I mean, you give different flavorings, you have different, what does the brand give you aside from just a bag of popcorn with their name on it?
So it gives a lot. We extend the category to map the products that they already have in distribution. So we go into the brand and then the subcategories. So for instance, we're using Hostess as just one example. It has Ding Dong and Twinkie and other sub brands that we flavor map to. So when
they have distinct flavors for sure. As a kid growing up with that stuff, you remember what they taste like.
Exactly. And what we can do also is, it's really a promise. It's the stamp behind the brand. Consumers know and trust brands, especially in the value class of trade. They've become very accustomed to certain brands. They know when they invest their hard-earned dollar in those brands, that those brands are going to deliver something back to them. And that's usually quality, value, and something that they trust. And that's a big part of it.
So even if you had plain flavored popcorn, that brand still gives them something safe, something they can trust, they can give their kids.
Yes. Right? Yeah, exactly. And that's a big deal, especially with the price of food today. People who are, working don't want to make mistakes in their purchases because they're expensive. The last thing they want to do is buy something for their family, which is expensive. Everything's expensive. and
Yep.
have nobody want to try it or not like it. So we make a very strong effort to deliver quality, and a strong value proposition, size and value.
That's interesting. So for a entrepreneur or any company that wants to offer some new line of products, the first big scary thing is, how are we going to build our brand? It's very expensive and very risky, isn't it?
It's a bet that is very difficult to finance against.
Hmm.
Bet that's very difficult to convince the retail buyers, and it's hard. And it's a much quicker path to market to license a trade name. And it's true that you don't build up the intellectual property value yourself. Um, so it's not necessarily your IP. It's not your IP,
Hmm.
uh, but you can spend an awful lot of money today, especially in such a decentralized and fragmented media market that has so many channels of opportunity for so many different demographics. It is almost impossible unless you have the budget of a major company to launch a product, to get branding across. So, I'll give you an example. We owned a brand that we purchased called Lavoris mouthwash, and
Hmm.
Lavoris mouthwash was a mouthwash that had an awareness of 90% plus in North America, through the 1980s. Um, and everybody's heard of that brand. Everybody knew it. We own that brand. We bought that brand.
Hmm.
Um, the reason the awareness was so strong was because you had, one or two newspapers in every city. You have 5 channels on television, and it was much easier for them to advertise and get that awareness. Today, if you launch a brand, you have to decide where you want to market that brand, what demographic you want to go after. It's so fragmented that
Hmm.
it is almost impossible to reach kind of, cradle to senior citizen in terms of awareness. It just won't happen. Even advertising on the nightly news on ABC is a demographic,
Isn't it
and
something?
younger people don't even turn on the television anymore.
I don't either. I mean,
Yeah,
really. So where are the eyeballs,
yeah,
right? I mean, they're everywhere,
exactly.
aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. They're in social media and there's so forth. And in some ways, the distribution of content is free, right? I mean, you
Right.
can distribute content, but where do you distribute it to? And who's looking at it, and how do you get their mind share? And then how do the big gatekeeper at retail is the buyer. How do you show a buyer that the product that you're presenting to them has awareness?
Yes.
So when it comes to licensing, you don't have to deal with any of that because nobody questions whether or not there's awareness to a brand like Hostess or a bath and body product like SpongeBob or
Sure.
Cinderella for children or whatever the brand is going to be. You've eliminated that barrier, and that barrier is significant. You can spend all the money you want on R&D and have the greatest product in the world, but if it's not available to consumers, it's very hard. Having said that, there are alternative channels that have become mainstream direct to consumer today. So it is better, Amazon is a place that you could launch your own brand because you have time to explain yourself to the consumer. So
That's
there
right.
are channels. But
Hmm.
in terms of retail, where I focus, it is almost impossible.
So if you put yourself in the shoes of an entrepreneur ready to launch a product, let's take a product that's truly a Me Too product, popcorn,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
There's so many brands out there. In fact, many of them have already kind of bought into it, right?
Hmm.
There's Popeye popcorn, just to name a few brands, right?
Yeah,
I recognize them because that's what my kids gravitate to,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And if I were to come up with another popcorn brand, how do I get on that shelf if it's a Me Too? If there's nothing innovative about what you're doing, it's not organic, it's nothing, it's no different than what's on there,
Mhm.
then you're gonna have trouble getting on that shelf.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. One of the things I lecture about, I talk to students at the business school at USC a couple times a year as a guest lecturer.
Mhm.
Um, I have never focused my entrepreneurial journey on making sure that whatever I'm developing is unique and is something that has never been done before or has
Mhm.
all these unique attributes. That is a false premise for entrepreneurs. Some entrepreneurs believe that in order for them to be successful, they have to come up with something that has not been done before.
Mhm.
I like to think about that as creating things that nobody needs or wants, you know, solving problems that don't exist.
Right.
My companies have been always competing in these with a total available market that is massive and well established. I've always competed with the biggest of companies because I don't want to have to prove to the gatekeepers that this is something that people are going to be interested in buying or need. So my products have been in the last 25 years in consumer brands have been
Mhm.
bath and body products like shampoo, body
Yep.
wash, conditioners, etc. Um, and snack foods like popcorn, puffs, related snack items. We don't have to show that there's a market for these products. So we check the box there. It isn't a small company has a very hard time bringing to market something that has not existed before. That's a huge area. Then
Mhm.
you couple that with a name of a product that nobody's heard of and not familiar with, you've got two gigantic strikes.
Yep.
So I, as an entrepreneur, have decided that I compete in large markets where I don't have to show availability, that there is an available market. Nobody doubts that there's a popcorn market out there.
No doubt.
And
Mhm.
licensing gives me an opportunity to prove that I don't have to compete and prove that my brand is relevant. So um,
Mhm.
we're just run a little bit faster, a little bit quicker in terms of execution than these big companies that are like battleships. I'm the little speedboat that drives around the battle.
Yes. Right. 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 But you got a big battleship behind you of your brand, don't
Yeah,
you?
absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
really
So
key.
yeah, yeah. So I can compete on the shelf with the largest brands that have spent, millions and millions of dollars advertising. I can pop up and compete right next to them.
Isn't that something? Well, even an entrepreneur that has a product that hasn't been done before, something new, and if it is relevant to a brand, this is a faster way to get it on the top shelf, isn't it?
Without a doubt. Yeah.
I mean,
I
if
mean,
you had a new alternative to Tums, for
mhm,
example, right? And you were able to maybe license, I don't know what it would be, I would say Rolaids or something along those same lines in the pharmaceutical area, right? You could use their brand to launch your new thing, even if it's patented and it has a new, a completely different function.
yeah. So if I had hypothetically a digestive solution, um, I would spend time uh, in the grocery store, at Walmart, at Target, and I'd be looking at brands that are relatable categories to digestion.
Right. Hmm.
Um, and I would look at, a brand that has, complete and total awareness, but is not necessarily in the digestive space. So, as an example, I could look at other medications. Um, I could look at, and this may not be the right example, but I could look at Advil. Advil doesn't have a digestive solution, but it's a brand that everybody knows.
Right.
I could say to Advil, come up with a licensed, we'd like to license Advil for digestion, and then come up with a brand that says Advil, stomach relief.
Hmm.
They have headache relief. Now they have stomach relief. You know, um, Nobody would doubt that the brand is well known.
Right.
And maybe that's the gateway to stomach relief, is to extend them from kind of muscle relief and inflammation relief into digestive relief. I mean, that could make sense, and
Sure.
that,
And there's also, it's funny, it's a good example because if you look at between Tylenol and Advil, they're arguing with each other over, well, theirs causes stomach problems. Well, theirs causes stomach problem. Imagine if you fell in between and said, well, we solved their stomach problem, right? We have a stomach problem.
yeah, absolutely.
You're there.
So that's and if that was on the shelf, you would gain immediate attention from the consumer when they go to the pain relief for stomach ailments section at
Mhm.
Walgreens, and there's an Advil stomach that is blasted on the label, reduces stomach pain and indigestion or whatever. You're immediately competing with Alka-Seltzer and Tums, immediately competing with them.
Right.
And if you price compete and you make certain claims on your label that attracts the consumer the right way, you're going to grab some market share. You're going to grab some market share,
Mhm.
and you're very very likely that you'll get companies like Walmart and Target to put you on the shelf because of the branding. If you put your name, Bruce's Stomach Relief on it, you have zero success
Sure.
of getting onto the shelf. You may be able to get onto Amazon and build a story for yourself, and then over time, when there's some awareness, you may be able to try it at the large retailers, but a long road and unlikely.
Sure. 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 Well, tell us about your new gig at Mammal Labs and how that started out.
So, dear friend of mine told me about Mammal Labs and said that company has acquired intellectual property, specifically patents in and around digestive health and cure solutions for animals,
Mhm.
and addressing a problem that does exist significantly, um, and has a solution for it that is healthy and safe and has been patented. So I took a look at the market, met the founder of the company, uh, and thought that there is something there. And it is a practical, straightforward solution, safe and effective, that can solve a very important issue in both companion animals and what we call production animals. And those are tremendous markets that we have identified a solution for. So very excited to be part of that group and lead that team to bringing that product forward, and looking forward to establishing a real beachhead around safe and effective way of treating, let's say, parvo in dogs, scours in livestock, in calves,
Mhm.
and other solutions. So big addressable market, and a product that is easy and safe, and is protected by intellectual property law and patents.
So it's a real problem you're solving. We've talked about this, and full disclosure, I'm the founder of the company, right? And Bruce has taken over. And yeah, so this, it solves a problem, and there doesn't seem to be any competition in there either, right? So you're really building a brand new brand with something brand new, which is going against a bit of your history for branding, right?
Yeah, well, we're not necessarily looking at this product initially as a retail product.
Right.
Um, so branding, consumer facing branding, is less important. And So what we've done is, I've said there's a couple of boxes I like to check. One is I enjoy competing in large markets. So
Right.
I look at the market here as for animals is digestive health. There is a massive market that deals in digestive health for animals, whether it's production animals or companion animals.
Right.
So that does not have to be proven, or the trade does not need to be sold on that market. That exists, no question, full
There's
stop.
definitely a need, right?
Yeah,
There's a need for
yes,
that
there's a
solution.
need.
Right.
And what Mammal Labs did was it built a moat around its solution. So there's a moat of water around our castle, and that moat are patents. So the way that we have defined ourselves is that nobody can compete against us with our specific solution, and that's a very big barrier for others. And the path for us is to get into and in front of the veterinary trade for animals, the food and treat segment of the market, and then on production animals, get into the feed and be able to put our solution into their feed. Um, those are very big markets, and we can compete in those markets with our solution. We've already gone to develop the product. The product is done. We don't have to try to figure out how to make it. It's been made.
Mhm.
It's been tested anecdotally. It works. We're getting clinical science to support our claims. But this is a trademark that has a lot of value to it. It'll have value in, as I said, the production side of the business as well as the companion side of the business.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that it's a product that's also natural, isn't it?
Yes, and if we do go to retail, we will likely look at as an option licensing, because
Mhm.
we want this to be an immediate solution for certainly for companion pet owners at the retail shelf, um, and a brand that they recognize will grab their attention very quickly. And if we're in the digestive health section of a retail specialty store or mass retail, and they
Mhm.
see a brand that they recognize, call it Hearts, or some other brand that could be Kong.
Mhm. Mhm.
It could be Kong Digestive Health. Kong has a big footprint in the dog space,
That's right.
and it could be a very good license, for instance, for digestive health. They're not in that space, and they may welcome the opportunity to license their name into that category, with a safe and effective product.
No kidding. So back to the history you described is not only are you in a space where you can immediately get on a top shelf, you can get on that top shelf exclusively where no one can move in and get another brand and copy you, because now you have patents that for a while, right? They last around 20 years from when you file them. So it's a long period of time. You have exclusivity, you could have a big brand. So you're taking your unique thing that is, you're talking about how any entrepreneur would struggle to build a brand, and suddenly they take this new, innovative, unique thing that's never been done before, and you're immediately on the top shelf if you get a licensed brand.
Especially with the cherry is the license, right?
Yeah.
Because that is going to resonate with the consumer. And what I would focus on is looking in the space, the pet space, um, and see what brands are very strong. Could be a food brand, it could be a toy brand, it could be a treat brand.
Mhm.
Um, there could be a vitamin that is, in the human vitamin brand that could be relatable. There's all kinds of
Sure.
options, but come up with something that really fits what we're trying to do strategically, and
Mhm.
marry that up with the product as you described, with that sort of exclusivity. Um, and then you've got an anchor, and
For dogs,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, why
absolutely.
not?
Yeah,
Recognizable brand, and they're
without
certainly not in that space, are they?
yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Mhm.
sometimes there's a hesitation for human consumed products to move into pet consumed products.
Mhm.
There can be, especially if it's an ingested product, there can be some hesitation. Not all the time, but there can be. Um, for instance, I was looking to license the Jello brand for vitamins, for kids chewable gummy bear vitamins.
Sure. Uh-huh.
And ultimately, Kraft, who owns Jello, decided years ago that they didn't want um, a sort of a snack food like Jello to be in the vitamin space because it could be overused by the consumer. So there's a lot of things that they didn't want kids to start taking too many of them because they think it's a candy. Um,
Sure.
and and so there's barriers, but you're right, Dave. We finding the right fit like Tums. I mean, that would be a home run, right? I mean, that would be relatable. It's exactly in the digestion space for humans, and put it in the pet space. Whether they would go for that or not, I don't know, but
Mhm.
that would be great. That's why I suggested something like Kong, because they're not in that space specifically. But they still have high equity and awareness. So there's different things to look at, different ways to look at it. The key is to make it relatable.
Yep. I don't know a dog that doesn't have a Kong.
Right.
I mean, really, you
Yeah.
talk about a wide-reaching brand. I went to a sea show, and there was a dolphin that was playing with a dolphin water, a giant Kong,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
amazing,
Right.
right?
So those are the types of things that the only reason to license is trust, safety, and awareness with consumers, right?
Yep.
Because it's an additional expense for the company, but I've
Mhm.
always viewed that expense as you know inexpensive in terms of awareness.
It's a modest investment when you compare it to building your own brand, the millions it would take to just do this marketing barrage. And again, where do you do it? Right? Facebook, I don't know, Instagram. There's so many places where the eyeballs are, and they're scattered everywhere, right?
That's the problem. You don't watch the content that your children watch, right? And it's no longer that family watching commercials about Lavorus mouthwash around
Right.
the television set. So it was a pleasure to build brands years ago because you had well-defined channels to invest your money, and you knew exactly how much it would cost. I
Right.
mean, and Nielsen would tell you how many people are watching. I mean,
That's right.
it was a formula-driven success. And today, yes, distribution can be free. You don't have to pay to be on the internet, but how you do attract these people is a whole other story. Influencer marketing is a whole other story. You and I may not care about a certain celebrity that's endorsing a product, and our kids won't care about a celebrity that's endorsing a product that we like. So
Sure.
it's very challenging.
Right. And celebrity endorsements. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
brand too,
yeah,
right?
it is. It
Putting a
is a
person into a product.
Yeah, it's a very big part of the market is celebrity endorsements, and licensing celebrities is a very big part of the licensing business.
Mhm.
At Evergreen, our company does not license people.
Why is
We
that?
don't- because people make mistakes, and sometimes innocently, and sometimes not so innocently.
Right.
And we do not invest and build into a category with a license of an individual that is subject to, you know, doing nefarious things and committing
Sure.
acts of that, especially in today's environment. Some of the biggest names have fallen for good reason, but also for reasons that are just a matter of people's opinion. So we don't want, to be crude, SpongeBob is not going to get pulled over for drunk driving.
Right.
So we stay away from celebrities entirely.
Even Taylor Swift, the biggest name in show business right now, and her boyfriend Kelsey, right?
Yeah.
He's probably a really great brand until she breaks up with him. Of course, we all know they're going to get married and live together forever, right?
Yeah, it is all
very fickle.
It's look, if we find out how they're voting, it's going to alienate half the country.
Oh my God, it's so true.
If we find out that they smiled in a photograph in China, but we found out that the background of what they were smiling in front of was built by Chinese forced labor. I mean, there are a jersey was made in a country that is adverse to the United States. There are so many reasons that we can attack people.
Yep.
That it is it's not only the obvious, it's also the things that aren't so obvious. And it's we're such a polarized society. We just navigate away from. I've always navigated away from all of that because I don't believe that that's stable, and I also don't chase things in terms of timing. Right? It's
sure
we don't chase movies. We don't chase. Barbie was the hottest movie imaginable last summer. So any licensed product. But if you're off and you go to market today with Barbie and you've got your launch, there's a tail off of interest, and there's already the market flooded with their brands and everything.
Right. It's a very complex thing. And what you've done, you've kind of elevated the whole analysis to the basic fundamentals, right? What's keeping those things on the top shelf?
Yeah.
What's keeping them on the top shelf? How do you leverage it?
Yeah, we do a lot of, our own gut check and what makes sense. And, at the end of the day, we do things that just make sense. And that's what we try to do. And our company, Evergreen, with a capital E, it really operates as a company with a lowercase e.
Got it. Yeah, well, a lot of things we talk about at Innovator Cafe is about risk, right? I mean, the entrepreneurs, you think they're just, they're the ones the first off the cliff. It's like my kid when he's mountain bike riding, he's always the first one off that edge, right? And guys like you and me, not so quick. We don't heal so quickly. We'll kind of hit the brakes first when the edge comes, right? But, we really talk about risk because risk is the precursor to failure, right? And you don't want to be risk averse entirely. Otherwise you wouldn't do anything. You just go get a job and get a paycheck, right? But managing risk is really underlying what you're talking about here. Don't use human endorsers, right? And that may be good for some for some companies and some products, sports equipment, right? I mean, you'd be crazy not to have some type of celebrity that plays the sport that you're supplying, right? But when you're talking about bigger brands like yours, there are things that you just don't need, right? And that's exactly what you're explaining here. Go for what's going to sell your product.
At the end of the day, Dave, you are 100% right. It is about risk and taking risk. So when we go to market, we license something, we're guaranteeing a rate of return for the brand owner, regardless of whether we sell one product or not. And many times we have a 7-figure obligation no matter what, right? These are big companies.
Yeah.
So they're not looking to make a couple bucks. So, we need to try to ensure as much success as we can and deleverage as much risk as we can. But at the end of the day, when we sign a licensing agreement or we acquire a brand, it's a risk.
That's right.
And,
It can
and
cost you either way,
it
right?
costs us either way. Yeah, it costs us either way. So when you're in licensing, there's a minimum expectation that the brand owner expects from your license, and they put it on you, and they say, well, you're the one who's licensing from us in this category. If you want our name, we're not going to ride the risk with you. You need to promise us that you're going to pay us a certain amount of money, no matter what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we'll take the ride with you. So that minimum guarantee is part of every licensing agreement, and that's real dollars that you put at risk before you have $1 back.
No kidding. And they don't want to take risk on their brand either. I mean,
No.
they want you to be successful.
They do, and there's a lot of due diligence that they do on who they're entrusting their billion-dollar brand with.
Right. Right. So when you're licensing trademarks, there's a little lesson in trademarks is that when you license trademarks, you need to keep control, because the purpose of a trademark is to avoid confusion. That's the underlying purpose of a trademark.
Yes.
And when you're building your brand, you, of course, don't want your brand to be confused with other competing brands.
Right.
And once you've established this, once you've established awareness, then you've wiped out this any kind of confusion, right? And any risk that would damage that trademark can be severe to a company. So they
Absolutely.
need to work with you, who they trust. And how do they do that? Like if Hostess is licensing, peanut flavored popcorn to you, how do they ensure that quality, that awareness, so that their brand is not tarnished?
Well, there's some objective ways, right? They make sure that the place that the product is being produced has all of the certifications that are required to produce quality product, all the FDA certifications, all the health certifications, all the social audits, all the compliance, everything that is required. They test the product, they inspect the product. Many times they inspect the facilities. They do third-party audits. And they have to sign off on where the product is being made, how it's being made. They need to be additionally insured on everything from us to the co-packer to all the way down the supply chain. And then they're familiar with the retailers. They see the retailers that you're going to sell to, and they have to approve the style guide. They have their own style guide, and they approve all the artwork. So, this is fully a license is fully endorsed by the brand. So our Hostess popcorn is 100%, endorsed by Hostess. It's not a product out there trying to confuse the consumer that it's not Hostess. This is Hostess. We are using their trademark. We could never get away with putting Hostess's branding and colors and all that and going to market. This is 100% endorsed by the company. So there's a lot of safeguards they put up, and they do a lot of due diligence on us as a company to make sure that we're in the space and we know what we're doing and we know what we're talking about, and we have the customer relationships and we understand supply chain. All of those pieces have to come together. There's a lot of pieces, and it takes a long time.
Well, you're standing in their shoes. You are Hostess, and you're selling their product. It is Hostess, and they're going to monitor you like you're a division of theirs, right?
That's right. They're gonna make sure that we uphold the standards and rigor. So when the consumer buys a product with ultimately their IP on it, that their promise to the consumer that they've built over decades is delivered by us as well.
Fascinating. Well, Bruce, thanks for joining us. Any last words for budding new entrepreneurs that are considering branding and risk and awareness?
There's nothing wrong with risk if it's calculated. You don't have to risk necessarily on a trade name. You don't necessarily have to risk in categories that are not yet established. As an entrepreneur, I've deleveraged risk in terms of trade names, and I've also deleveraged risk in terms of being operating and selling into distribution channels that have very well established large available markets. And those are the two biggest barriers for entrepreneurs. They fool themselves into thinking that they need to have something that's unique and different, and they don't.
So you're really looking at, de-risking the failure by leveraging these brands who have already, built the castle for you.
That's right.
Excellent. Great advice. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks
My
again for being on Innovator Cafe.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
You've been tuning into Innovator Cafe, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.